All right, today we're going to explore a subject that's very often moralized, but very rarely examined with precision, which is quitting. So, in the popular imagination, quitting is synonymous with failure. It's perceived as a weakness, and it's perceived as a lack of will and an absence of grit, an absence of character. But I want to explore quitting as a structural, epistemic, psychological necessity, not a lapse of character, a core. I want to explore quitting as a core life skill, a rational mechanism for self-realignment. Letting go is not always a defeat. In many cases, it is the only path forward. And being unable to shift into that frame of mind can often be a liability for you. And being able to shift between frames so that you're able to decide when you need grit and when you need to quit is a higher level life skill than saying, I never give up. So I want to frame this concept in historical context, as I often do, which is really, where did this concept come from that quitting is like life heresy, basically, right? The resistance to quitting is historically rooted in moral narratives and specifically economic narratives. So there's something called the Protestant work ethic, which was crystallized by Max Weber in his famous book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, 1905. And definitely worth a read. And there's been a lot of reaction to this book. A lot of people disagree, will critique Weber, saying he doesn't, from a theological perspective, saying he doesn't understand Protestantism, he doesn't understand capitalism, but it really crystallizes an idea that serves as like a useful conversation point. That's brought up a lot of good conversation throughout history. So Weber, he reframed discipline and industriousness as signs of salvation, at least through the Protestant point of view. This isn't Weber saying this. Weber's a sociologist. He's evaluating the work ethic associated with Protestant psychology, right? So Weber he's saying that persistence becomes, in this predestinarian point of view, a moral good. Abandoning one's course is a failure of the soul because you're departing from divine destiny, right? So this ethic was intensified by industrial era productivity models that instantiated and concretized this concept of divine determinism. What was divine determinism in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries became industrial determinism, capitalist determinism, economic determinism, right? So these industrial era productivity models really intensified this Protestant work ethic and made it more real. The ideal worker was a machine, reliable and repetitive and immune to fatigue or doubt. And quitting was inefficiency, because quitting is unpredictable. Quitting is waste. Quitting is insubordination. Quitting is unsystematic. And these narratives, they linger. They shape the internal voice that condemns reevaluation and reframing and saying, is this really for me? So even when the project or the job or the relationship or the identity structure that you have has long ceased to serve any coherent function for you, you still hold on to it literally just because. Just for the sake of holding on. Just for the sake, really, of not letting go. Because of what you believe that will imply about who you are or what you are or what your quality is. So let's move into a more productive mode. And let's look at this concept of epistemic adaptation, which is the role of model revision. And epistemic is really a philosophical term that means anything that has anything to do with knowledge, how we know what we know, right? So to have epistemic adaptation means that we are nimble in how we relate to our methods of knowing that we're able to shift. So quitting, reframed epistemically, is the act of model revision, meaning mental model, right? So every life system, a professional life system, a relational life system, creative life systems, every life system is based on predictive models. So these are predictive models, are assumptions about what outcomes will follow from what inputs. So these are algorithmic assumptions. But when outcomes consistently deviate from predictions, we face a choice. We increase effort or we revise the model. We keep pushing forward harder or we renegotiate the situation. So academic Herbert Simon, in his theory of bounded rationality, in his book Administrative Behavior, 1947, recommend, proposed that human decision-making is constrained by limited information and processing capacity. So this is this concept of bounded rationality. So rather than optimizing, what we do is satisfice. So we choose options that are good enough under certain constraints. And in this frame, quitting is not failure, it is a recognition of model exhaustion, a revision of belief under empirical pressure. So I've observed this model to no longer function far beyond the grace I maybe should have given it. And so now I'm going to revise it or abandon it. But this leads us into a bit of a psychological trap, right? Which is identity fusion and the sunk cost fallacy. So why do people actually persist? Because persistence is not always rational. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's not. And the skill is in knowing the difference between those two situations. So persistence is very often identity bound. So when effort becomes fused with self-worth, then abandoning a goal feels like dissolving the self. This is what makes quitting hard. Not the loss of the goal, but the perceived betrayal of a self-concept that relied on that goal to be intelligible. So there is a great book called Judgment Under Uncertainty, 1974, by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. And this is about, this book, Judgment Under Uncertainty, is about cognitive biases. And it describes the sunk cost fallacy, which is the tendency to continue to endeavor because of previously invested resources, even when future returns are unlikely. And to this, in addition, we might call this also like the self-conceptual sunk cost, right? Which is the psychological difficulty of discarding an identity we have invested years in maintaining, right? This self-conceptual sunk cost fallacy. But this is who I am. And letting that go. It's one thing to let go. It's one thing to fall for the sunk cost fallacy. In a relationship, that's hard to let go. Maybe in a job or a career, that's hard to let go. But what about in my own identity? Where do you even go from there? In a relationship, it's like, okay, well, I resort to myself and maybe one day I'll find another relationship. In a job, it's like, all right, well, maybe I'll make a career shift or find a new company. But with the self, it's like, who am I if not this? So it's not even like it's easy to let go or easy to quit or easy to reframe the self. With the self-conceptual sunk cost fallacy, it's like, I would love to let this go, but what is that even? What are the ergonomics of it? How do I detach from me? And reframing and renegotiating your own identity becomes like a very meta, high-level, difficult task. At least it can feel that way. Which is why often we require some kind of guide or help or assistance or therapy to do this. So this brings into view really a core concept, which is the achievement subject. The achievement subject being the subject, the individual who achieves, right? And this is somebody who has defined a way of viewing human organisms in which doing replaces being as the ontological primitive for human existence. So Byung-Chul Han, in his book, I've mentioned this before, The Burnout Society, 2015, he critiques the modern ideal of the achievement subject, which is the person who internalizes external metrics of value so deeply that doing becomes being. Performance becomes ontology. Ontology, again, is just another philosophical word for ontology is the study of being, the study of what is. So what you are becomes defined by what you achieve rather than simply what you are passively. So it requires a more active determination of self-definition. That's the achievement subject. So in this frame, quitting is not just hard, it's inconceivable. To quit is to dissolve the self because the self has become performance itself. And Hahn warns that this produces a new pathology, exhaustion, not from work, but from the impossibility of ceasing to work. A kind of structural depression born from compulsive continuation. So now we move into this another concept from a book that we have mentioned before, which is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's book, A Flow. And this is a counter model in which he states the challenge and skill are perfectly matched, and time feels suspended when you enter into this place of flow. And in this state, the self is not abandoned, but suspended, fully present in calibrated action. And we move to another book we mentioned, Self-Efficacy by Albert Bandura, where Bandura argues that the belief in one's capacity to execute a course of action is central to agency, but self-efficacy depends on accurate feedback loop. Continuing in a misaligned system erodes the belief over time. So a key paradox emerges. Quitting preserves self-efficacy because it honors signal. It restores credible agency. Quitting is actually an active agency. So, what we're actually talking about, to quit well and wisely is to reclaim authorship. It is not an escape from effort. It is a reorientation of effort towards something tractable, meaningful, or survivable. And it is not a failure of grit. Very often, it is a refusal to mistake inertia for integrity. So the strategic quitter is not one who gives up when it gets hard. They're the one who can distinguish between difficulty and distortion. The strategic quitter is somebody that can distinguish between a real cost and an identity tether, between failure and fidelity to a deeper project. And quitting, when done well, is not actually resignation. It is a structural upgrade. It is a creation of space and power. And not all systems deserve persistence. And not all effort is noble. Sometimes to quit is to declare, I am not my sunk cost. I am the system that survived it.